All right, well, let's go ahead and get started while we're waiting for some others to join us. My name is Julie Gabrielson. I'm here to help you with this fun outdoor essential program. Again, just to better remind you, help us serve you better. At the end of this webinar, there'll be a survey that will come to you, and we ask that you fill that out. It helps us decide what kind of programs to bring to you, what the public is looking for, how they feel about the current program that they just joined in on, and just a lot of other ways that we are able to gauge how we're doing for you through all of this. Couple of the guidelines for the program tonight. This is a family program. It is rated PG, and so we do ask that everybody keep everything on topic and family friendly throughout it. If you're going to use the chat or the Q&A, which we will use both of those tonight, feel free to keep making comments about the topic that we are working on. Don't veer off into other areas where we're not going to address those areas tonight. Again, we will use Q&A. Questions, we will have a section at the very end where we'll be opened up for questions, but we'll also allow some questions throughout the program as well that the moderator on the other side will alert me to if they're pertinent to the immediate topic that we're working on. So while I am getting started on this, I would like all of you to tell me where you're from. Using the chat box, if you're not familiar with how to use that, you'll see in the bottom right or in the bottom panel of the chat box, it'll have an option for all panelists and attendees. Just make sure you're connected to that so that we can see everybody's comments. So telling us where you're at, I'm going to start with my introduction. As I said, I'm Julie Gabrielson. I'm a conservation educator from the Department of Wildlife. I'm based out of the Elko office. On the other side is Julie Bless, the other Julie. She's the moderator, and she's joining us from the Western region over in the Reno area tonight to help out. And again, she'll be following along in the chat and the Q&A to make sure that we answer any questions or recognize any comments that pertain to the program tonight. I'm just going to put out there, I am not an outdoor survivalist expert, but I do hold some certifications in wilderness first aid and even wound management. I've also have a lot of time in the field, both personal and developing as a professional as well with my current position. And I have some search and rescue experience as well. But Outdoor Essentials really comes down to survival. And so we're going to cover several different topics today that roll into that. Covering a few techniques, but we're not going to get too greatly into techniques. We're going to talk more about the items to keep with you, and that on learning those items will be on your end in the future as you acquire them. We're going to talk about some of the dilemmas that you might consider and that you might encounter when you're outside and in the outdoors. Things to remember, things to keep at top of mind when you're out there. Those items that we're going to cover. Items that help more than others. Outdooring with vehicles or dogs. Those are going to be covered tonight, as well as some training options for you that, extended training and learning that you can take on, as well as extra thoughts. Some of my personal thoughts, as well as maybe Julie Bless on the other side will also jump in, I'm sure, and share some of her thoughts, as she's got a lot of experience out there as well. I will be using a lot of different products. That does not mean that I'm endorsing that specific product specifically. So just because I use it doesn't mean that it might be the best for you. There's lots of different options out there, and we'll go over that as well as we progress through this tonight. Going back into covering techniques, there are some really skilled survivalists out there. They don't use modern resources, but that's not what we're doing here tonight. We're talking about the more common and even more current items that can help make your next outing much more comfortable, more confident, and just a more enjoyable experience altogether. If the more skilled survivalist stuff interests you, I can send you some links on that, and there are lots of options online that you can Google and get into for that. Oh, sorry, we're bouncing all over the place. So let's get started with how do you adventure? Using the chat, I want you to tell me what your preferred adventure, as well as what an essential item is that you would insist on taking along with you. So are you a glamper, a camper, an extremist? Do you prefer a picnic in the park? Do you prefer to rough it on the top of the mountain where nobody can be found and you're usually just a bivy sack and maybe a tent? Do you like multiple days? Do you like a big camper? Or do you like all the above? Or do you want to just sit home and watch everybody else do it? So yep, a camper and water, that's a great essential item. And also hiking and water bladder. So great, both of you guys are experienced or are outdoors women, because I believe we've got Samantha and Julie on there. So what is survival? Survival, as we saw a year ago when the pandemic hit, is a lot different than extra TP or canned foods, a bunch of rice that you might have in your closet. I'm going to take a real quick break. I'm going to disconnect my camera until I absolutely need it, just so that we don't have any internet disconnects and you lose me for any amount of time. So I'm going to disconnect that for right now. So the definition of survival is the act or fact of living or continuing longer than another person or thing. There's a secondary definition as well. That's the continuation of life or existence. So when you take that and roll it over into survival skills, to define that, survival skills are techniques that a person may use in order to sustain life in any type of natural or built environment. Those techniques are meant to provide basic necessities for our human life, which include food, water, and shelter. We're trying to catch up. So having all of that in mind with what survival really means, a lot of people go out there and they have the "it will never happen to me" thought in the back of their mind. And I see that a lot when I'm out on the trails, when I'm camping, when I'm hunting. I see that a lot. And it goes back to the social media post that I put on this screen. Hey, hiker with the huge backpack and trekking poles. My 5-year-old just walked to the same place as you did in flip-flops. So I don't know what they were trying to prove, other than maybe just how unprepared they were for an event with their toddler being in flip-flops hiking to the same place. Maybe they only went to the park that was a 5-minute walk from the truck. I don't know. But to me, this showed a huge lack of education of what just can happen when you're out there. And it's more common than not that you see this on a regular basis. When I go on hikes, I'll see people making these 5 or even 8-mile trips, and they might have 1 or 2 20-ounce bottles of water with them, not even a pack or anything. They're just carrying the bottles of water. And those actually make me nervous when I see them, because of some of the situations that I've seen people get into. Here's a couple news articles that I just pulled fairly easily from our local newspaper. Those incidents do happen, and you really have to think, are you prepared for a vehicle breakdown in the middle of nowhere, a water shortage? What if you're making that 5 or 8-mile trip and you're halfway into it and you're suddenly out of water? Do you have a filtration system? What about a sudden storm? In northeastern Nevada, I'm not overly, sure what area of Colorado you're in, and the other areas of Nevada, of northern Nevada, anyways. But in my particular area, if one little cloud is in the sky by noon, there's a good chance we're getting a heavy thunderstorm by the middle of the afternoon, and it just builds that quickly. Medical emergencies, are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for a forced overnight stay? So these are survival situations, whether people really think that they're going to happen or not. I'm going to play this video, so hopefully it doesn't hold up on you.
The American West, its size, its rugged beauty, and its opportunities drew the pioneers out here, and it still draws people. They arrive in insulated, air-conditioned castles on wheels. Their sense of security is as complete as it is unfounded.
Right, I just about got this cotter pin out. You think they'd have instructions for this thing?
Blair Cheever, optical engineer, 34 years old. His wife, Peggy, 32.
It's not even cooking at all. It's just laying there.
Frankie is 10, a good age to see Indian country. And Margot, the family Springer Spaniel. She may be the only one at home in the outdoors. They decided to hike to the top of the mountain behind their campsite.
Ready for that big hike, Frankie?
They packed some wine, some suntan lotion, a frisbee, a magazine or two, and nothing else. They had no idea of the weather forecast, and they didn't have a map or a compass. What looked like 5 miles would be more like 15 because of some pretty rough terrain. A good hiker would take nearly all day to cover the same ground. They were about as fit as the average American, and that's just not fit enough.
John,
What?
are you sure we're going the right way?
We're going the right way. We're going up. Look, it's right over there.
In short, the Cheevers were out on the end of a very long limb.
That path right up to those trees.
But it doesn't...
Right. Well, see, we're going to come out of this any minute here, and then,
Ouch!
Peggy began to realize that they might have misjudged their little outing, but Blair, like too many other men, just took it as a challenge. What they needed was some good advice and the sense to accept
we're
it.
going in the right direction. Hi. Hello there.
Hey, how are you?
You just coming down from up there?
Yeah, we sure are.
Well, that's where we're headed.
We're up to the top, huh?
That's right.
We just came from there.
That's a long ways up there.
Are we going the right way?
Yeah.
Doesn't look too much further.
It's a long ways up there yet.
Do you have any extra clothes with you? It looks...
No, we're...
Something's moving in here. The weather could change real fast, you know.
Well, it was sunny just a minute ago.
This weather changes fast. It could blow over. It could stay here for hours. You have no way of knowing.
Looks to me like it'll blow over, though.
Yeah. Keep your fingers crossed, I guess, huh?
We'll be all right. Don't worry about us.
All right. Well, good luck to you, folks. We'll see you.
So long.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Let's go.
John, I hope you know what you're doing.
Late that afternoon, the temperature dropped 25 degrees in 20 minutes, and 30 degrees more in the next hour. It snowed nearly 3 feet through the night, and the wind was a solid 35 miles per hour. An average October storm in the mountains. That happened not too far from here. We'd been searching for 2 days when I spotted the dog. I thought we were in luck, but as it turned out, the dog was the only one alive. As far as I'm concerned, that guy killed his family through his ignorance and his male ego. Hiking is not a competitive sport. And just because somebody else can do something doesn't mean that you should be able to do it. And if you can't, it doesn't mean that you're any less of a man. All of this is bigger than you or me, and you can't control it. Especially the weather. There are no thermostats out here, and the weather can become fierce beyond belief.
All right, hopefully that played well for you guys, and that you didn't see it without it locking up too much, but at least hopefully you heard the full audio. So how do we make sure we don't become one of those statistics? Because it's not a reality TV show out there. Like you said, it's not a competition when it comes to being outdoors and enjoying yourself. That's the ultimate key, is to just enjoy yourself out there. And by having some of those survival basics behind you, you're going to enjoy it even more, knowing that you're a little bit more prepared in the event that something does happen. So looking at the survival basics, most people will tell you the number one rule is don't panic. And in most cases, that's the case when you're actually in their survival situation. But my absolute first rule is always filing a trip plan. And we're going to go into just what a trip plan is next, and just how to build it, who to give it to, what kind of information is needed in that. But ultimately, yes, once you're faced with that survival situation or any kind of a situation, even if it's pretty minor, don't panic. Keep your mental about you. Keep those thoughts really calm and easygoing, because it's going to make it a lot easier to work yourself through whatever situation you're faced. Build a shelter before it gets dark so that you're not struggling looking for things to tie off to, for materials to build that shelter with. Build a fire for heat and comfort, because fire is actually, for me, I can just get lost in a fire. When things are just overwhelming, a fire will calm me right down. And I think that's pretty common for most people. If you're using a vehicle, don't travel after dark. Even on foot, you shouldn't travel after dark. There are a couple situations that you should, And we'll talk about that just a little bit and quite briefly. If you are in the vehicle, don't leave the vehicle. Your vehicle makes a much bigger signal than any amount of time that you could spend on foot out away from it. And don't waste your water. Definitely learn to conserve that. So when it really comes down to how I don't become a statistic, it's keeping that calm frame of mind, good choices while you're out there. And of course, the supplies that you have with you will also make that difference. So making that trip plan, it's a who, what, when, and where plan is what it comes down to. When you set that plan, you tell the proper person who you're going with, what you're doing, where you're going, and when you will be back, and give them instructions. If I'm not back by 10 p.m. on this day, call out search and rescue, send somebody to help. Get a hold of me somehow, if possible, if I have those devices that will allow that. But don't just give that information to willy-nilly people. You want to give that information to people that know the area that you're going to. So in the event that they need to go and find you or look for you, they know that area and they're not trying to just pinpoint it on a map and figure out how to get there from there. Find that person that you have confidence in could get to you, or at least to that general area in the event that there is an emergency. So this ultimately, before you ever set foot out of your vehicle, out of your house on that intended trip, this to me is the absolute first number one step. Next, knowing all of this, there's some more survival rules that you need to keep on mind. And again, this goes back to your train of thought and keeping things at top of mind so that you know what kind of situations you're facing. Survival rules of 3. How many of you knew this? You've got 3 minutes without breathable air before your body starts shutting down, 3 hours without heat, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. So to give you an example of how this works, our body, even though, yes, this says we can go 3 hours without heat or 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, that doesn't mean that our body isn't going to start suffering before those limits have been reached. Our body will start, decomposing and really showing the signs of the lack of those particular elements long before that. And a good example is, so I want you guys to use this activity. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to talk you through it, but I want you to hold your breath, and I want you to hold your breath starting right now. And I want you to hold your breath for as long as you can. As you start holding your breath, it starts out pretty easy, but as you hold it longer, your face and your brain, it starts to feel funny. Your face starts getting really red and you feel like you're going to pop, and everything in your body is starting to intensify the longer that you go and hold your breath. Again, all of those blood vessels, they feel like they're throbbing and your body starts to stress. So that you can let your air out anytime now if you're still going. I want you to put in the chat how long you were able to go, if you were able to go until from start to finish of when I said. But this is a really good example on a very easy level of showing how your body can starts to react as it approaches its bodily limits. But on the other hand, the body is pretty amazing and recovers really well if you give it the opportunity to. So knowing all of these particular rules of survival, let's move into prioritizing it and how you would prioritize it. And I want you, looking through this list is actually how I prioritize it according to those rules of survival that we just went through. Yours might be a little bit different. You might feel it's a little bit different. Feel free to put in the chat if you don't necessarily disagree with me, because there's no necessarily right answer when it comes to what your priority concerns are. Only you know what those concerns are. But based on those rules of 3, the very first 3 in this priority list are all 1 for me. I consider them all 1. So shelter, fire, and clothing all go into the 3 days or the 3 hours without heat. Because once my body starts losing that core temperature, it's going to start getting rough and we run into other issues. So give me, tell me how you would rate yours. Go ahead and use the chat and tell me if you would rate yours any differently. I'll give that a few seconds. always water first. You know, I did for a really long time, and it's still a highly important item for me. So I totally agree. For me, it's definitely, you know, I don't go anywhere without it. So with this, using this, we're going to go into a dilemma, and I want you guys to work through this dilemma and tell me what you think would happen with it. So the day started out sunny, and by mid-morning, a nasty, freezing drizzle has settled in. You didn't bring any rain gear with your pack, and now your clothes are just completely soaked. What do you do, and how do you prevent it? Anybody have any ideas? Give you a second on that. So yeah, one of those ideas is, you know, as far as what do, you find a way to start warming up. You find some shelter, you build a fire if you've got the materials for it. How do you prevent it? You bring extra clothes in the future, and you think a little bit ahead of time, whether it be, you know, raincoat, rain pants, you know, a parka, some kind of a bivvy that will keep you dry. So yeah, we've got some comments. Find shelter, get out of the wet clothes, pack rain gear appropriate to avoid not happening again, and also maybe even turn around ASAP. So yeah, if you're not too far from your destination or from your origination, then that might not be a terrible idea to just get out of there altogether. So going into warmth and talking about ways that you can work through this. So again, 3 hours without heat is when your body really starts to shut down because of hypothermia. So hypothermia usually happens between 30 and 60 degrees. If water's involved, let's say you fall into a lake, a cold lake, or it starts raining or snowing on you, that time frame and that temperature can change a little bit as well. But you know, that water will make everything cool down considerably quicker. But when it comes down to it, the shelter is going to bring you warmth, and it's going to bring you weather protection. So who can tell me what the first sign of hypothermia is? Anybody? Go ahead and use chat and tell me what you think the first sign of hypothermia is. Tingling. Okay, good. Shivering. Yep. All right. So they call them the umbles when it comes to dealing with the different symptoms of hypothermia. You'll frequently heard it called the umbles. So shivering, it starts with shivering. So you're, you know, kind of, you know, getting everything moving, and then it moves into like fumbling hands, and your hands are not real easy to maneuver and work with things. Then stumbling and mumbling. At that point, it's starting to get pretty moderate in severity. And by the time that it gets to severe, you're crumbling, where you're unable to walk, you're unable to get up and move around. And at that point, you're losing your cognitive ability as well. So people will start removing their clothes because they think that's, you know, they suddenly think they're hot. So they'll actually remove their clothes in an effort to work through this process, when in turn it actually just does the exact opposite and increases the symptoms even more so, and the severity of it. But there's all kinds of weird things that it will make you do once you hit that moderate to severe stage of hypothermia. So this is why I put the warmth and the weather protection as my first priority, simply because if I don't have the cognitive means, then I'm not going to be able to do other things either. There are lots of homemade store-bought type shelters that you can build. You can see in this picture, we've got one that's a homemade built, essentially. They've used a tarp and some strings tied off to trees. That actually does help. But ideally, if you're trying to get away from weather and cold temperatures, you're going to want some more sides on it than that. Natural shelters, finding a cave, where some rock enclosures, not even like a deep cave, but even rock enclosures can help with that. Dense trees will help make some good cover for you. Using a tent, your emergency bivvies, large garbage bags, tarps, depending on what you're using to carry stuff around and how much room you have will make a big difference on what you can carry. But there are some things to take really carefully. I'm going to turn on I'm gonna try to turn on my video and hopefully we won't lose anything here. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can see me now, because I can't see me. So this would be an emergency bivvy. This is just one particular type. You can see it's pretty small. I'm not going to pull it all the way out of the sack because sometimes it can be difficult to put back in. But this particular one is a one-person emergency bivvy. They make a two-person bivvy and some bigger ones, and those are not much bigger. So you can see they're not too big when it comes to size for packing around. They're really lightweight. They're, I mean, just a couple ounces a piece. But those are what not necessarily this particular brand, but I would use these and recommend a genuine bivvy over those plastic hooded ponchos, like what you see in the picture on the left and on the screen. Those are very thin. The Marlar ones are very thin that you can buy for $1 or $2 a piece. They rip easy and they really don't offer any protection or warmth. They offer more protection from a light rain than anything, but they're not strong, they're not overly versatile, and they're not very big. So a hooded poncho will rarely, or even the Marlar emergency blankets, I'm only 5'4", and it rarely am I able to go from head to toe on it. So those are the type of things to really think about if they're going to be an asset for you or more of just a pain and something that you wish you'd never bought. Next, we move into the fire. So fire, again, it goes into that multi-purpose of not just getting you warmer and getting your body temperature back up where it belongs, but it also works as a signal and it's a comforter. It makes you feel better. It kind of calms you down a little bit. But some things to think about when you have your fire building material in your pack is to always practice. Never go out there with an item that you haven't practiced with. You don't need a bonfire when you build it. You can just have one small little personal fire, because bonfire creates other issues as well. It can get out of control, not to mention you're going to burn yourself out trying to find material and enough tinder to continue on with a huge fire. So it's just not recommended. So I've put in this picture a couple different homemade fire tinders as well as store-bought, and then some igniters as well that I use. So the tinder shown, you're going to see dryer lint on the far left, cotton balls. The far left cotton ball is plain. The cotton ball to the right of it actually has like a petroleum jelly rubbed all over it. And then the one to the right is the fire stick. That is just a really tightly woven material that is supposed to be able to ignite it even when it's gotten wet. And then down below it are pyro putties. These are typical fire putties. That's just this particular name brand, but there's multiple different types of fire putties out there. Some things to keep in mind with the putties is that they, like pyro specifically, they have different blends depending on the type of weather that you're going to be involved in, whether you're going to be in a little bit warmer temperatures or you're going to go down sub-zero temperatures. So in this case, one of those packets is a winter temp putty, and the other one is a summer temp putty. Then we've got the igniters. Not all lighters are good for high elevations. There's a lot of actual lighters that won't work in your higher elevations. So when you're looking at that, you're going to make sure that if you use matches, that they're waterproof matches, that they are strike anywhere matches. So in the event that you do have an issue, that they'll still work for you. Not to mention, make sure they're big enough to where if you are starting to get really cold and you've got those shivering hands, you can still work with them. On the far left of the bottom picture, that's a flint and magnesium striker. So that is a really solid, useful item, but there are some disadvantages to it compared to a ferro rod, which are the two middle lighters there. And then the one on the right is actually an arc lighter. So I'm going to show you a video. The next one is a video. And I'm going to show you this. And this is going to go through how all the different tinders ignite with the different igniters. Hopefully it plays right. So the note on that is that the magnesium burns out very quickly if you don't have your tinder ready to throw on it. On the magnesium sputter, it takes a lot of effort to run that off, and then it does work out pretty quick and burn out pretty quick. So through this whole video making, I did a lot of experiments with the petroleum jelly, seeing how well it makes that cotton ball continue to stay lit. But I can't get the petroleum jelly to light by itself. It just works really good as an extender of the cotton ball. The fire stick, which is what you just saw pieces from, and it's going to be in this next section too. Those were not as easy to ignite as I was hoping they would be from some of the advertisements. But they definitely, once you spread it out and made a nice little pile with it, it was a little bit easier to do it that way. One of the keys with the putties is that you spread it out this way and allow some of those little fingers and frays to expose themselves from the pile of putty. If it's too compact, it won't light either. So again, I was having fun with this and I thought, okay, let's really dial this in and see what's going to be the best as far as longevity and what's going to give me more time to get smaller tinder, like little wood sticks on it, and allow the fire to really get moving and going. And ultimately, of the homemade stuff, it was the cotton ball with the petroleum on it. Now your fire sticks and your pyro putty, those will last, even just those little small pieces will last 5, 10, 15 minutes, depending on how big of a chunk that you light up initially. But they do last a really long time as far as the initial light on them. So I'm going to put the video back on and give you an idea. So ultimately, my favorite of all of those lighters was probably this ferro rod. And I have a couple different ones, but this particular one, I really like it for a couple of reasons. It strikes really easy. The ferro rods compared to a match or the flint and magnesium, they throw off a lot more sparks and a lot hotter sparks. So it'll ignite your tinder a lot easier. But this particular one of the things that I like so much about it is that it's easy to handle. It's big. I'm not worried about dropping it and fumbling it. It's definitely something that would be much easier to use in the event that I did start shivering and my hands were starting to get so cold that I couldn't hold things easily. So this was my favorite. To show you the arc lighter, I'm gonna go ahead and light it for you, but you can kind of, hopefully you can see the arc in the middle there, trying to get it to the right angle for you. But that's how that lights. And it works even through wind. You can get it wet and it will still light. It's rechargeable. So if you have, a device that will charge it, you can recharge it in the field. But ultimately, this will continue to work for, I think it said, like 3,000 different lights. So each time you push it, 3,000 of those before it gets to a point where you have to recharge it. So moving into the layers, when it comes to the warmth and the body temperature and keeping your temps up, always bring extra layers. This is pretty common what you see here that I have in 9 out of 10 of my packs, regardless of whether it be a half-day trip or a 4-day trip out into the wilderness. This is what I have. I always have an extra hat, gloves, extra, scarf and buffs, things to cover my ears. The bottom right is a rain jacket, and it folds up into this little pouch. So it's not huge, but it's pretty lightweight. And then the bottom left jacket, it's got a little bit of a waterproof, more like it just kind of beads up, but if it were to get genuinely soaked, then eventually it would start soaking through. But it's just an extra layer on top of it, but it's light enough to where it doesn't add a ton of weight to me. So these are just some of the things to think about. What are you going to put into your pack, and what do you consider as your priority when it comes to these different scenarios that you might face? So moving on, we're going to move into the next dilemma. It was a hot, strenuous climb, and you've used up all of your water. Now you have a terrible headache, red-faced, and extremely thirsty. You stumble upon a smelly seep with muddy water that's been stirred up by cattle. What do you do? Give you guys a couple seconds to answer in the chat. What do you do? Do you drink that muddy water? Do you walk away? What are you even dealing with? What might be causing that? Definitely don't drink it. Correct. Definitely don't drink it. Sometimes, it's just not worth it. But so yeah, there are definitely some things that you can do. If you have water purifiers with you, or if you have filter or iodine tablets, or even if you've got, fire capabilities and you've got a plastic water bottle, there are definitely some things that you can do to not have to drink that water. But ultimately, how do you prevent it? You bring plenty of water to start out with. And once you run out of that water, like this guy did, you have the tools to make sure that you can filter even that smelly, seepy water. It may not taste the best, but it will be more safe than drinking it directly. There's lots of different things out there that you can get water illnesses from. Giardia is a big one. It's also known as beaver fever. A lot of people don't realize that Giardia will actually swim upstream from where it was contaminated. It's a really strong virus that can get you, and some people are affected greatly by it. Some people are not hardly affected at all. But I mean, I've known people that have gotten it at the exact same water hole, and one of them isn't affected for the next month, and the other one the next day they're in the hospital needing electrolytes and IVs to flush it out of their system. So some things that we can do to prevent that. In the picture you see in the bottom left, there's an Algene bottle. We've got the water bladder for a Camelback, and then a life straw. I also have some of the actual hand pump filters that you can use to refill things like the bottle or the bladder. The life straw, if you've never used a life straw before, they weigh about 4 ounces, maybe. That might be giving it too much weight. But these things will filter up to 1,000 liters of water before you need to replace it. It's really super easy. Sometimes it's a little tough if you're not super nimble and agile, but you put one end in the water and then you drink out of the other end, and it will purify that water as it comes through. And it will get rid of most of the, around these areas anyways, it's certified for getting rid of those viruses that you really do need to worry about. Another thing is to have items to boil the water if necessary. If you notice in that top right packet, there's a couple different water purifier tablets. One is iodine, one is just a genuine tablet. There's also a real thin mesh, almost like nylons, like ladies' nylons. Only this one is, it was actually used for covering food from bugs that I cut up. But I'll use that and I'll cover, after I boil the water, I'll put that over the top to pour the water out into another container or into my mouth so that I'm not getting all of the chunks from nasty water if I have to go that route. So the larger purifier, electrolytes, ample water, these are all things that are going to make it so much better for you in a situation that you have that. I always carry a full bladder. My bladder is like 101 ounces. And then I always have the life straw as well as the tablets with me just in case. So it looks like, yeah, Julie and Samantha, man, you guys are on top of it. That's awesome. So some of the ways that you can boil water, these are a couple different, so you've got a jet boil, the little, stove looking thing to the far right on the top picture, that's a little stove as well, kind of like the jet boil. It's just not as contained as the jet boil. And then some little metal containers that are going to hold up to any heat or flame that you put them against. There are some cool ways that you can boil water bottles in a plastic water bottle. There are techniques for that. You hang them pretty high over flame, and eventually that water will start boiling in it without the bottle melting up and dropping all the water out. If you get it too close, it definitely will. But there are some ways to go through that. I'm not going to show you that particular technique, but I am going to show you how to build a still, because a solar still is the next best thing. And that's where that clear $1 poncho might come into play, or the emergency blankets, because you can use those as part of building a still in the event that you ever need to. So here's a video for that. Hopefully you can see all
Solar still. It's a simple thing. It literally creates water out of thin air, and it's easy to build. Just dig a hole a couple of feet across by a couple of feet deep. Place a container in the center of the hole. Cover the hole with plastic. If there's vegetation available, put that in the hole too. Then weight down the center of the plastic and seal the edges with sand. The heat from the sun creates water vapor in the hole, which condenses on the plastic and drips into the container. The vegetation speeds up the process. One still will provide between 1 and 3 quarts of water every 24 hours. That's not enough to keep you alive, so it's important to build 3 or 4 separate stills. But don't build the stills or do any other kind of work during the heat of the day. You use up more water than the stills can produce.
All right. So yeah, so there's several different ways that you can work it out there. You dig that hole, you place the vegetation in it, you use some of the materials that you have on hand, but these are just some of those things that you keep in mind for where you're going, how far you're going, how long you're going to be out there, and just being prepared for it. And these are not heavy things. I mean, with the exception of the plastic, you can find pretty much everything out in the field with you.
A solar still.
So the next important, going down our line of priorities, on my list of priorities, as again, yours might have changed. And I just saw your comment, Samantha. Yeah, it is. When I saw the plastic bottle method, I thought there's no way, but it really did work. I watched the whole video on it. I tried it here at home and it actually worked. So a lot of times when you're out in the field, you can find old plastic bottles and if you start boiling the water in it, getting water in it, then it's probably going to be safe to use the bottle anyways, even if it's an old bottle. So yeah, it was really cool to see that. So moving into signaling. So I'm all about the satellite GPS, but there's so many different ways to signal. There's a lot more affordable ways than some of these satellite GPSs, but they're not as reliable or quick as some of these GPS units. So I use an inReach, and again, I'm not recommending that the inReach is what you should go get, but I use the inReach, And I absolutely love it. It's the one, it's the second one in from the left. The spot and the inReach are both in this picture. They're both satellite GPSs. So what is a satellite GPS? That means that you have full communication with another party on the other end, whether it be 911, whether it be your emergency contact as a family member, whether it be another phone number that you put in there, you have full communication with them when it comes to text messaging. You can send maps to them. You actually can download maps on there. These also will connect to your phone, where you do all of it through your phone, even when you don't have cellular service. Then you've got the middle one, which is a distress GPS. That's essentially a personal location beacon. The avalanche beacon is also a personal location beacon, but they work differently. So the distress GPS in the middle, that spot, it just has that SOS button, and essentially you are just sending your satellite, your location, your GPS location to emergency personnel, and they're sending somebody out to you. There's not any way to communicate back and forth with the person on the other end. And then the avalanche beacon works more like a transponder unit. So that unit has to be on. And if those are, I mean, obviously used when you're out snowmobiling, snowshoeing, skiing, doing any of that backcountry stuff where you might encounter avalanches and you might get buried. You need to make sure all of these units are on before you ever step foot in the field. Make sure they're fully charged, so that in the event of an emergency, then you're not worrying about it finding the signal and other people finding the signal and finding you. In the event of the avalanche beacon, once you're buried and this is on, and another person comes in with a beacon that can read the signal that your beacon is putting out, then it starts sending signals saying, okay, you're 100 yards away, you're 50 yards away, you're 30 yards away. And it will kind of give it a direction for where you are in comparison to the search and rescue team. But it doesn't give an exact location. So they have to kind of work into it and dial into where you are through stepping and just kind of figurating around and starting to dial that in on a physical level. And then from there, they start searching and digging through snow when they get closer that way. The thing to make sure of with any of these, like I said, make sure they're fully charged when you get out there and have extra batteries if they run off of batteries. Make sure they're on when you step foot for your first, part of that trek, and always keep it on your body. Don't put it in, if you're snowmobiling, don't put it on the snowmobile, put it on you. If you're hiking, maybe not even in your pack, because sometimes we take those packs off for a break or whatever, and you might, slip and fall. Put it on your belt loop. Have it be right on you so that you have it right at your side when it's time to make that call if necessary. One of my preferences with the satellite GPS, the inReach, and so this is mine. The thing that I like the most about this one is that the SOS button is clearly covered. I cannot accidentally push that button. I have to make that effort to open it. Whereas my experience with the spots in the past is that you can accidentally hit the emergency button and have 911 calling you. So this is just a little example of a text between myself. This is actually between myself and my husband through the inReach. Where I was at, I had no service, but I was able to, with my phone linked to the inReach, we were able to have this conversation. It is a paid service and it can be a little costly depending on your budget. I don't go anywhere without it. If I leave the house, it's in my truck. If I leave my truck, it's in my pack. So with the exception of a few little things, I keep my satellite GPS everywhere with me. Some of the other signaling devices that you might run into. Oh, and I just realized I didn't have my camera on to show you the text string. So this is my inReach, sorry. That's the bad thing about not being able to see my own camera. And then this is the text stream between my husband and I through the inReach. So you can just kind of see it works like a regular text on any kind of a cell phone. And it does work with any cell phone. You just got to download the app. Sorry about that. Okay, so other signaling devices, flares, whistles, emergency mirrors. Some things to be really careful of though is flares, while they are fantastic, they're not just a signaling device, but they're also a fire starting device. But you have to be really careful and make sure you're paying extra attention to those flares because they can cause much bigger fires than you want. Something to remember with whistles is metal whistles can tend to cause some problems with the ball on the inside. Sometimes they'll freeze up because of the saliva from when you blow on them. Mirrors, just, that's another thing you practice with, with those emergency mirrors and the flares and, well, maybe not practice the flares, depending on your area, you probably could. But yeah, definitely practice with those. This particular whistle also has an internal light. So it works as a flashlight, that little button on there you can see. It also has a compass on the other side. All right, turn my video back up just to make sure we don't lose signal. Some other things, snacks. So now we're moving into 3 weeks without food. So 3 weeks without food, that's a long time, but I know I frequently go like 3 hours without food and my stomach's starting to scream at me. So there's several different types of food that you can take. Again, take food that fits your needs. If you've got food allergies, obviously you're gonna wanna take stuff that you can pack, that you can carry. There's lots of stuff that you can get out there with that will work really well for you. There's some cool survival tabs that I always keep in my pack as the absolute drop dead emergency. I don't get into them unless I'm all out of this kind of food and I'm genuinely an emergency. I will not get into them. And they're just these little tiny tablets. Actually, I might pull one open for you. They're these little tiny tablets that, you can get 300-400 calories a day through using these tablets, but enough to sustain yourself when in need of a little extra food. But they come in several different flavors. They actually are not bad tasting at all, but this is, the survival tab. And there's several different types out there, this type of thing as well. But this I do not open. This is an absolute emergency only. And then obviously I have other snacks on there that are used a little bit more frequently for my rumbling stomach. But then we've got, you can always look into edible plants in the region. Know them though. Do your research on non-edible and edible. I love, even when they're not necessarily for my specific region, I'll pick up, brochures and pamphlets on edible stuff or, what I might encounter in the areas that I'm going into. But there's lots of different ways that you can get that information in your region on edible plants and non-edible plants. Then we're moving into another dilemma for you. So while pushing through some dense brush, a limb swings back and hits you in the face, embedding a thorn in your eye. What do you do and how do you prevent it? Give me your thoughts in the chat. What do you do about it? Boy, Samantha, you are nailing it. Yeah, you want to immobilize it so that as you're, getting out of there, you don't have other stuff, ripping and tearing through the eyeball, but you don't pull it out because you're just going to cause more problems when it comes to actually taking care of it. So yeah, you patch it up somehow, you immobilize it to where it's not going to move around as the rest of your head and your other eye moves around, but don't pull it out. How do you prevent it? Yeah, wear sunglasses next time. Wear a ball cap. Even just the brim on a ball cap will make that difference for you. There's a couple different things that you can do, but ultimately that preparedness and then knowing what to do when you're faced with it. And yes, try to pay attention. If you're walking with people ahead of you or behind you, don't just let that limb fling back. Allow it to ease back, or make sure that the person behind you knows that it's coming at you and let them hang on to it before you let go so that they're aware of that. So great. Yeah, those are great options there, Samantha. Great job. So what do we do on the basic first aid then? So basic first aid, even though, again, I carry all of these items with me. Everything you've seen here so far today on these pictures are items that I carry with me, regardless of their priority on the list. So basic first aid is essential for everybody to have. But if you have additional training, there's no harm in carrying this stuff for that additional training. Using, knowing how to build a splint, or knowing how to use a tourniquet, knowing how to dress a wound and pack a wound and clean a wound. If you know how to do that, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to carry that kind of stuff. So you can carry personal medical items in your kit as well. If you've got extreme allergies, heart condition, diabetes, any of those kind of things, make sure your first aid kit is personalized for your needs, as well as potentially somebody else's that you might have come across on the trail, or a partner out on the trail with you. Gloves, burn cream, alcohol wipes, wound cure, moleskin. Sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. Moleskin, Tylenol. There is a difference between the uses for Tylenol, ibuprofen, and aspirin. I carry aspirin in the event that I come across somebody, or even start feeling it myself, for heart attack or strokes. Ibuprofen, it's multi-use for pain, fever, and inflammation. Tylenol is used for pain and fever, and you can bounce back and forth between ibuprofen and Tylenol in the event that you needed to. So in my kit, I've also, what you see up here, obviously I don't carry the full-size bottles of the painkillers up there, but I do have tourniquets, I do have CPR masks, I do have medical scissors, I do have stuff for building splints in the event that I need to, even though I don't necessarily need to use things that are a pro splint type material, and I don't necessarily have that. I use rope and some other stuff like that. So these are just some of the things according to your comfort level, your experience, your training, what you carry in your first aid pack. Then I've got my extras, those survival tabs that I just showed you. I always have extra hand warmers on me. I probably have way more than I will ever need, but I always have extra. The poncho, the emergency mirror, a compass, that little wire thing that you see there, that is like a chainsaw of sorts. So it can help me cut through smaller pieces of wood, as well as, like if I needed to cut open a fish, if I caught a fish, it would help me cut it open if I really needed to. But I do also always have knives, but there's different ways that you can use that saw. There's paracord in there, and I am a chapstick fiend. If somebody told me I had to choose between chapstick and my InReach, I'd be in really big trouble because I love them both. So the orange thing, are we back here on the orange thing? Samantha, which orange thing? Okay, so on this one, you're talking about this little thing right here, the one I'm circling with my mouse on a key ring? I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. So that is actually a collapsible emergency CPR mask. Hold that. I got one right here. I can show you. So I keep one on my keychain as well. And it is just a little tiny plastic. Again, I'm not going to unfold it all the way, but it's a little tiny plastic CPR mask. It's got the ventilator in there so that when you lay it over the victim's mouth, it keeps anything from coming back at you, if you are familiar with CPR or CPR. But yeah, that's what that is. All right, cool. And I'm glad that you know what I'm talking about too. So this is my extras. This is my next set of extras, because I have a few extras that I just feel like they make things a little bit easier for me. These are not necessarily essentials, but they are definitely things to think about depending on other items that you carry with you. I always carry wet wipes with me because it makes the bathroom use a little bit easier and nicer. I'm a bow hunter, so I almost always have an Allen wrench tool set with me. not only for my bow and any repairs I might need to make in there, tightening things up, but for my trekking poles. My trekking poles tighten and loosen using Allen wrench fittings. There's also a bunch of paracord and extra tie down straps that allows me to, if I needed to make an emergency shelter, I could tie it onto trees, things like that. Up in the top corner, that's a knife. That's one of my hunting knives and extra blades for it. The bottom right corner, that's like my fun gadget page. So first of all, we've got the extra battery for charging any of my electronic devices, the USB, and I've got the different connectors for it for going from, a smartphone to a Samsung. I've got some headlamps there. The inflatable little puffy clear thing that you see there is actually an inflatable lamp, and it lowers down into this, but it's also pretty handy because we'll turn it on. Hopefully you can see just how bright it gets. It's got 3 different brightness settings. Hopefully I didn't just blind you, but it also, because it's solar powered, and this one is super handy, it's got a USB port to be able to charge all of those devices as well. So if for some reason my battery bank that I carry along with me dies out, or even if I just don't want to use it, I can charge everything off of this using that same USB power cord. I like finding gadgets when I'm out there. Sometimes I never use them because they're worthless, and other times I absolutely love them. But everybody's entirely different. Pick what's going to work best for you and go with it. There's no reason, you're the only one that's carrying it. So you're the only one that's getting in the way of whether or not you have it or not. So my personal emergency kit, everything that you've seen so far, the total weight of it is just under 4 pounds. So it's like 3.5 pounds. Measures about 7 inches tall, 21 inches in circumference, depending on the pack that I have it in. Other than fire starters, this kit is never touched. I will use the fire starters on occasion if I'm out, just bouncing around and I'm having a day lunch, and we start a fire for cooking whatever, we catch fish. I will use them for that. But other than that, I don't use any of these unless it's absolutely, my emergency. And the thing to think about is remember to always replace your items, especially ones that will date out. A lot of your medicines, if you're carrying ibuprofen, Tylenol, things like that, those will date out. So you're going to want to keep those up to date. Batteries and hand warmers will also lose their oomph. So you're going to want to stay on top of those. So we'll move quickly into our furry friends. So I hike with a 100-pound lab 99% of the time that I'm hiking. She's a big dog, and so I let her carry some of her own weight. But a dog can only carry 25% of their weight is what you want to keep them at or under. Obviously, you don't just throw them into it. You let them build up to it and easily work into it. And something to think about with your furry friends. Even I do a lot of off leash with my dogs, but only in areas that are not popular, that there are not a lot of people around. And the minute that I do see somebody, she's called back to me and she's kept at a heel, and she's not allowed to just run up and jump all over people. So leashes are a good thing to have on hand, even though she is as obedient as she is in that case. She usually always has a training collar on her, and I have a leash on me as well in the event that I need to use it. But I also carry, she gets to carry her own water and food, unless we're in a heavily watered area, then I don't worry about that. And her own emergency kit. She's got stuff in there for tick removal, for snake bites. I use some Benadryl for snake bites and some, other allergies that she might get into. Some wound care if she cuts herself, she tweaks a toenail. There's an emergency blanket in there for her. The worst part about having that big of a dog is that I personally could not carry her off the mountain if I really needed to. I'd have to make a nice little sled to pull her down on. But they've got some really neat stuff depending on the size of your animal and your physical abilities to carry them. That Fido Pro in that bottom left corner, it's such a cool pack. You just literally put them in there, their legs hang down. I imagine they probably get a little sore from it after a while, but it is a really good alternative for carrying a wounded dog off the hill if you need to. Something to think about. So adventure on wheels, and I'll throw out there that the dog usually goes with me on the wheeled adventures as well. So she just adds even more to the mix. So vehicles, well, they do bring a lot of comfort and, you know, a little bit of confidence with them. They also can bring a lot of problems that we don't expect. You know, Nevada, I know, Samantha, you're from, you know, Colorado, but Nevada, we are the driest state in the union, and we still have plenty of opportunities to get stuck in mud and ice and just general mush. So, you know, getting stuck is an issue. Engines, you know, engine issues can cause problems. Flat tires, there's just all kinds of things that can come up that we want to make sure we're prepared for on that end as well. We've had, you know, a couple incidences in our area where people have gone off road and they've gone astray for one way or another, one reason or another, and they've not returned because they made poor choices once they were out there when their vehicle got stuck. On this particular situation, it was an elderly woman and man that were driving down from Idaho through, you know, Nevada. They took a wrong road because the GPS actually, you know, told them to go there. And they attempted to turn around, and when they did, their van got stuck in the mud. He took off, he left, and went to see if he could find help. And he never returned. It was actually, I believe it was 49 days of being stranded when we found her still in the truck. And she actually managed to survive on trail mix and hard candies, as well as the melted snow. So, there, I mean, we found him another several months later. Some hunters found his remains in the hills. So yeah, it's really, there's a lot to consider when you even have a vehicle. So some things to keep on hand. And I'm sorry to see you go, Samantha. Thanks for joining us. This will be videoed, or it is being recorded, and we will put it onto YouTube on the Nevada Department of Wildlife channel. So you can check in and finish up there. So some other things to know with your vehicle, you know, have a winch with you, have you know, some extra tow straps, tow chains, some ways to get yourself out of mud. That's what those orange boards are for. You know, the handyman jacks to help you get out of some of those other predicaments as well. Just some extra things that you can have on hand. I would also add shovel and gloves to all the pictures that you have on here. And that's not it. Fire, you know, some way to you know, help out if there's a fire, because sometimes we cause fires with these vehicles running across the dry ground. Extra water, you know, your first aid kit in the vehicle, and then extra fuel. There's different ways that you can be prepared out there, and extra fuel is always a help as well. I have one extra item above all of these that I keep in my vehicle that I use several times a year, frequently when I'm ice fishing. They're called over boots. And they allow me to put my regular shoe, my foot in my regular shoe inside this boot. And it comes up to about the bottom of my knee, and it keeps my feet incredibly warm. I've stood on ice all day long, ice fishing, and never had my feet get cold with these over boots on. So just another option to look into. So ultimately, no matter what your activity or comfort zone, today's items should be thought about and really considered as having on hand. If you're new to the outdoors, research the best shoes, the best socks, the best clothing for you. Good example is fleece versus wool. My daughter absolutely swears by fleece, where I swear by wool. And it's just the way our bodies react to it. And so nobody's the same. There's no right answer. Just go out there and do your homework and practice with this stuff to make your experience more enjoyable. So ultimately, preparedness does not replace good judgment. You know, that trip plan and the signaling device will make huge differences in any extreme emergency in your adventures. But know your limits and make good choices by those. Google Maps are not always correct. My biggest piece of advice that I give to just about everybody that I talk to, whether it be young or old, and no matter what they're doing, is to be smart, be safe, and have a ton of fun doing it. So just a few quick little notes, you know, some additional ways that you can get some extra training. These are not the only ones out there. These are just some of the ones that I came across, some of the ones I'm familiar with. Through a lot of these different resources, you can learn how to assess situations, determine your personal ability, care for critical bleeding, critical wounds, how building and use of a splint, the proper reporting to 911, just what kind of information they're going to need. If you want this information, you are welcome to contact me. My email address is on the bottom of my video of my screen, and you are welcome to contact me with that, and I will be happy to send you some of these resources and answer any additional questions that you have that I don't answer here. So with that being said, do we have any questions? While I'm waiting for any questions, some things that I recommend putting the extra funds into, and I say this after years and years of acquiring all these things, and I just have prioritized a little bit at a time what I could afford to buy at each particular time. Shoes, buy the right shoes, have them fitted correctly, talk to somebody about the right fit for your foot. Clothing will make a difference. The comfort of your pack and having it fit you correctly will make a big difference. Your SOS GPS device will make a huge difference, not only in the event of an emergency, but just for your sheer comfort zone and for your family's comfort zone, because you can communicate with them through that. And your shelter material. These are definitely things that I'm willing to put a little bit extra out for the cost of. So if we don't have any questions, how are we doing over there, Julie?
We're good.
We're good? All right.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Well, perfect. All right. Well, then I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up and call it a day. And again, you'll be able to see this on Nevada Department of Wildlife's YouTube page. You can just log in, and within a week or so, you should be able to see that on there. And again, feel free to contact us anytime. We're happy to help with additional information and follow-ups on this particular program as well. And we do ask that you help us by filling out that survey at the end of the program and letting us know how we did and what else we can do for you. Big thanks to Julie on the other side. Thank you so much, Julie, for joining us tonight. And we'll go ahead and sign out. Have a great evening, everyone.